Okay, it looks like we're live. Hello, everyone. My name is Duren. I'm your host. Changing the Game was created to bring leadership insights straight to you from female professionals who are out there making a big impact in their industry. Today, I'm joined by Sloan Shanahan. Sloan is a former D1 golfer who started her career consulting for one of the world's largest and most well-known professional services firms. She has since left to pursue a career in sales, where she is passionate about using her background as an athlete to build high-performing teams and give high performers an environment to thrive and excel. Welcome, Sloan.
Thank you, Jordan. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to chat with you today. Sloan and I connected, probably like a month ago now at first.
Sounds about right. Yep.
Just did a big trip to Croatia. So we were chatting all about that beforehand. So exciting.
Had a blast. I highly 10 out of 10 recommend. Everyone should go.
We should, if we have time at the end, or maybe Sloan, if she's nice enough, we'll send her itinerary in the chat afterwards for anyone curious.
We'll see. If anyone wants it, you guys know where to
find me. Awesome. Okay, Sloan, let's kick it off. I want to bring us like all the way back to the beginning. I love to open with this question. What were you like growing up, and how did you become a collegiate athlete?
Yeah, great question, by the way. I probably would be described as relatively vivacious. I was a super active kid, into everything. Was blessed and fortunate enough to have parents that were super supportive of that level of activity. So it was basketball, tennis, soccer, swimming, golf, you name it. If we wanted to try it, my parents were all on board. So super active lifestyle. I think one of the pivotal things in my life was when I was younger, my dad traveled a lot. So when he would come home, my mom was like, she's yours. Get her out of here. I've had enough. So he and I spent a lot of time on the golf course together. And I really think that's where my passion and love of the game came from. And then I also, competitive family. We have a healthy competition within in all regards, whether that be sports or academics or anything like that. So just really competitive environment and super supportive parents of, really fostering that nature and just kind of that natural tendency.
I love that. So then you fostered your love for the game growing up. How then did you make it to Clemson? What was that like?
Yeah. So for those who haven't been through the college recruiting process, it can be a stressful period. There's a lot of factors and a lot of things. I know you had Ashlyn Ramsey previously on this podcast, who was one of my teammates, but her and her sister and some of the other recruits that had already committed to Clemson when I engaged with them were a big draw. That was a fantastic talent pool. We were actually the #1 recruiting class in the nation, which is kind of a cool thing to be a part of and be able to look back on with a great amount of pride. So I saw the team that the coach at the time was building, saw the opportunity at Clemson to start something new. There's not too many Power 5 schools where you can go and actually start a program. So I thought that was super special and super important and wanted to be a part of it. And it wasn't too far away from home. I wanted to be out of state. I grew up in Georgia, so it was close enough, but still enough to get out there and explore a little bit.
Yeah. So you went into college knowing you were going to play your sport. Did you have an idea then of what you wanted to study, or were you just solely focused on athletics at that point?
So I don't know. Probably my coaches won't appreciate this, but I can look back and say it now. I loved golf, but there was always a businesswoman inside of me. I really enjoyed that side of the world. And I think also playing golf and spending a significant amount of time with businessmen, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And, there was a lot of, who I grew up playing with. That was a lot of Clemson's donors. And you just spend a lot of time around those types of people. So I knew that I really wanted to be a part of the business world, and I didn't know if professional golf was going to be for me. So I would say I approached college with I have to maintain a high level of play because that is what they brought me here to do. But at the same time, I made sure that I was really paying attention to what I wanted long term. I had always been it's interesting. I studied finance, but I was terrible at math as a super little kid. And I got better and I think it was something that frustrated me. So I decided to get better at it and ultimately studied finance, knowing it would open a variety of different doors. Obviously everything kind of comes back to money at the end of the day. So if you can learn to play that game, you can kind of pivot around and take some different opportunities with that.
Yeah, I love that you let the lack of like math ability at first motivate you rather than frustrating you. I took the opposite route. Uh, I let it just totally frustrate me. And now anytime I'm asked like a math question, I feel like I have a slight panic internally.
It's okay. I can't. I'm sure if I have coworkers that watch this, they make fun of me for my spelling.
Okay.
I can't spell to save my life. I've tried. Like, thank God for ChatGPT because it definitely proofreads the majority of my my poorly written emails. So everyone has
That,
their strengths and their weaknesses, right?
that is so funny. Yeah, it's weird how the brain works. It's like it tends to be one or the other.
Yeah, can't have it all, right?
No, I know. If only we could, maybe one day. So tell us about then your transition. There was always a businesswoman inside you. How did you end up at Ernst Young then? Talk about that journey.
Yeah. So that journey was through mentorship. Once again, everything goes back to the youth, right? Once again, as a kid, my mom had a very good friend who I had watched actually pretty successfully navigate um, being being a businesswoman and a mom and everything else that came with that. And she had had this really cool, bold career where she had traveled the world. And I called her. I think it was my beginning of my junior year of college, and I was like, hey, I really need to start thinking about internships. And at the time, my mind was really leaning towards investment banking, but I had heard about some of the lifestyle things. I didn't know if it was for sure for me, but and also I didn't necessarily want to be behind a computer screen all the time, and I really loved people. And so I was having this conversation with her, and she was like, I really think you'd like consulting, and I think you should do an internship in consulting. And she had been with EY. I think she was there for almost 40 years, so she had been around the block a little bit, and was actually on the talent side of the business. So she made some introductions for me, wound up going through the whole recruiting process, interned with EY the summer before my senior year of college. Absolutely fell in love with it. Loved the ability to have to really stretch your mind from a critical thinking perspective, but also, it's a high intensity environment. So I think it kind of gave that same feeling of being competitive and having to really be dialed in at something, where I was able to leverage the things that I was learning in school and being a college athlete and really apply those to my day to day life. So that was my introduction to consulting. And at the conclusion, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this forever. Like this is my calling. This is going to be fantastic. So I joined full time right after school, and really, really enjoyed it and thrived. But we learned some lessons along the way around, your brain shifting and your mind shifting. And as you have more experiences, sometimes things change. And that was the case for me.
Yeah. So you said you thought you'd be doing it forever, but you just talked about some shifts in mindset or just in maybe what you thought your future looked like. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I struggled with what a lot of other people do in the workplace, and that was burnout. I think one of the hardest things, and this is something when current student athletes reach out to me and want to have conversations, or I find myself being asked these questions. One of the things that I go back to, and something I wish someone had told me, was you are already a high performer, right? You are stepping out into the world as someone who has demonstrated that you can commit to something that's bigger than yourself. You've demonstrated that you have the utmost accountability for not only for yourself, but those around you. And I actually had someone I've done a significant amount of business with call it, you just have a big engine, right? You can handle a lot, and you've proven that. And when you step out into the workforce, all of the support systems that were traditionally around you, right? So whether that was academics, lifting, specialty coaches, mental coaches, like the beauty of athletics at that level is there's someone for everything. Like there's no excuse not to be successful in that
Mhm.
regard. And then all of that kind of falls away. And so next in my case, I wanted to be the best. I was pushing really hard, striving really hard, and I let some of the other things in my life go. I wasn't eating and exercising like I should have been, and I wasn't necessarily taking care of myself in the way that the standard that I would traditionally hold myself to. And that's because I had not taken accountability for replenishing those things that I lost. But I don't think that in the moment, right? That's one of those big lessons and learnings that eventually comes through. And I mean, the majority of my adult friends are from my time at EY. And it's truly a cherished time. And I learned absolutely so much, but I did not know how to be accountable to myself to really make that a long-term thing.
Right.
And those firms have lots of resources, but at the end of the day, like you have to own your career and you have to be the one making sure that you're taking care of yourself so you can have that longevity. So
Yeah.
I ran out of some steam, and plus two, I think part of that steam was a different calling and scratching those different itches. Sometimes you can get so narrowly focused on this is it, this is what I'm going to do, and you kind of ignore and suppress other parts of yourself that may need to shine through.
Yeah, Sloan, I love that. I think that's a great lesson because your health really is so important. Like careers are important, but if you don't have your health, like you can't pursue those amazing goals that you have. Um, and I think a lot of athletes struggle with that when they're transitioning from their sport to the professional world. We're used to heads down, being dialed in, going hard after our goals. And a lot of those goals are health centered when we are competing in our sport, but they stop being as health centered when you go into the workforce if you don't put that emphasis on them. So, what advice would you give going through that yourself to athletes who are maybe experiencing that, or anyone really that is experiencing that in their current career? How would you encourage them to maybe address some of that burnout?
Yeah, to me, getting people in my corner who I trusted or had really emulated those things that I wanted in my own life, getting those people into my camp and not being afraid to ask for help. Yeah, it's cliche, you hear it all the time, but in the student athlete environment, help is forced upon you. Like it is not really an option. Like you're going to be helped whether you want it or not. You always have the opportunity to kind of prove out of some of those micromanaging tendencies, but they're not bad, and they're there just to help you be accountable, and they're there to help you be successful. So I think for any student athlete stepping out of that arena and into the business world arena, you have to find ways to supplement those things, and I think that's through a lot of mentorship. And I also think it's staying really involved with your network and other student athletes who are making that transition with you. I would say one of the kind of, I wouldn't call it a mistake, but one of the lessons that I learned from that was I almost shifted identities, right? Like overnight, I went from, okay, I am a student athlete to now I am a business professional. And I didn't carry through some of the things and the people that probably really would have helped me in that transition because I was, just I think there was also, looking back on it, some sadness, right? That phase of life had
Yeah.
ended. And rather than, giving myself time to process, like, okay, we are truly making a shift. I just kind of closed the veil down on one side and opened it up on the other and stepped through. So I didn't know that at the time, but that's definitely something that now I know to be aware of. And I've re-engaged a lot of those people from that period of my life that are now very important, and also understand me, right? Like me as an athlete, and how to, potentially talk to me in a different way than someone in the business setting might.
Yeah, Sloan, I completely relate to that. Just going through that identity shift and not really knowing you're going through it at the time. I experienced that when I was in law school, just having ended my volleyball career. And you don't see it until you're through it almost. And
Definitely.
so I'm right there with you. And those healthy habits are really important to come back to, or just like leaning on your network.
Absolutely.
I just want to emphasize that. I thought that was a great point and something that a lot of candidates that we see do struggle with.
Yeah, I think it feels overwhelming or like they're a burden to somebody. I don't know. I remember feeling like I would have people ask me questions. They're like, "Well, don't you have someone in your network that?" I'm like, "I don't want to burden them. Like, I don't want to reach out." When like now being someone that people reach out to, I'm like, "Yes, oh, like I get to be included. That feels good."
Yeah.
So I wish someone had like probably opened up that door a little more, or maybe I had asked to have more of an open conversation of like, "Hey, if I reach out to you for this, like, is that okay? Is that burdensome?" And really just opening up the dialogue, I think, is the most important thing someone can do in that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, we're more alike than different, and we all generally want to be helpful. So, yeah, I think that's a great call out. I want to focus a little bit on your transition then out of EY into your next role. What did that transition look like? You were at EY for almost 8 years, right?
Almost 7. Yeah.
Almost seven. So something that you'd really established yourself in, it became the norm for you. What was it like transitioning away from that role and into something new? How did you prepare for that change as well? None of
Another
the really
another
questions.
identity shift.
Yeah.
I guess my life's been a lot of identity and shape shifting here. I would say there's always the concept of running to something. And I did my best, granted, in the state that I was in and kind of really being ready to be done and move on to something different and start exploring what I really wanted and finding that purpose. I did my best to run to something. And I knew that I wanted it to be sales. And I actually engaged a dear friend of mine to help me through the process of getting my resume in a good spot, taking time to help me figure out what was out there. So again, I went to a coach. there's another theme. I hired this gentleman to come in and help me and really make sure that I was thinking things through and defining what I wanted my purpose to be. So ultimately met some fantastic people over at Tenchel, went in and started as a business development executive for them and helping them explore their professional services and really leaned in with that team and had a great time doing it. I think ultimately, I had a lot of talking about some of these things in my life that I hadn't taken care of. Some of that followed me into that role at Tenchel.
Okay.
And it was hard, right? Like I absorbed a pretty large team too at some point as well in a domain that I was not familiar with. So my role went in from, started as individual contributor, really kind of morphed into a leader, but I was leading people in something that I didn't have, frankly, a ton of confidence in. It was something I hadn't done, but I was having to step up to the plate and learn, be a learner and a coach at the same time, which was a fantastic stretch and a great opportunity. I think what I learned was I was not passionate about that content. And it really took its toll on me. It took its toll on me in a way that I didn't even know until like I was out of alignment with what I wanted. And fortunately,
Mhm.
I had mentors around me at that point in time to be like, yes, this feels like failure, but it's not. You're just not in alignment with what you need and what you're trying to pursue, and that is okay. And once again, it took its toll on my health as well. Like I got really sick there towards the end and had to make
Yeah.
the hard decision to leave just because was struggling to find my footing. And fortunately, throughout that time period, I had been engaged with or I was prospecting a client, and fortunately had showed off enough to
Yeah.
where when he found out that I left Tendril, he was like, "What are you looking for? What do you need this to be? How can I enable you?" And I was very grateful to land at Sikich, where I am now, and really be building something from the ground up. And I'm having an absolute blast doing it. So I think the moral of that story is you're going to trip over some rocks and you're going to not necessarily land where you should the first time, but those people, as long as you're around good people, those people will understand, which, my Tenchel family was fantastic through that whole adventure. But
Yeah.
it's just hard and people have to make pivots. Like, I guess is really the moral of that story.
Yeah. Okay, Sloan, you made so many amazing points there. Like as you were telling that story, I was like trying to mentally check off all the things I want to ask you about. So early in that story, you had mentioned you always knew you wanted to be in sales, or you knew that that was going to be the next step for you. So I guess, how did you know that?
Yeah. So one of the cool things about consulting is that there's really no delineation between the sales team and the execution team. So you
Okay.
really, if you align yourself with the right people, you get to learn both sides of the coin in that environment. And when someone would tell me to make a PowerPoint slide articulating, wealth and asset management, I'd be like, oh, fine, I'll do it. But when someone was like, hey, I need you to build a pricing model and we need to talk about this deal structure and what this timeline looks like, I was all over it. Like I genuinely enjoyed stepping up to the plate and doing those things. So the more I did that and the more I had the opportunity to like learn how to craft messaging and learn how to articulate value and things like that, I was like, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. Like being able to like coach someone through into a business change or a new technology or something was what got me out of bed. So that's how I knew that I eventually needed to move in that direction.
Yeah. It's like you didn't have that idea going into your role at EY, but through some of your responsibilities, your efforts, or just things that you tried that were maybe outside of your typical day to day,
Yep.
really allowed you to kind of say, hey, I actually have a general interest in this. I think that goes to say, like, it's really important to not say no to things at first. Like, if you can handle it mentally and physically, then it's good to not say no to things and just take on some different responsibilities. And that kind of leads me into my next thought. When you were telling your story, you said you felt like you weren't enjoying your role at Tensional, or you weren't enjoying that specific moment when you were there. And it felt like a failure at the time. But then your time there actually allowed you to move into this role now that you love. And so
Yeah.
it kind of, and I have a lot of parallels to that. I felt out of alignment at a previous role before ending up at Shift Group. And the doors wouldn't have opened for me at Shift if I wouldn't have been in that role that felt out of alignment. So I just think that your story, I just wanted to really hit that again, because it's so important to lean into what you're doing at the current moment, because you never know where your next opportunity is going to come from.
Absolutely. And you're always interviewing, right? I think that's you're saying it in a much more eloquent way there. But the sales brain in me is like you're always on stage. Someone is always observing behaviors, patterns, disciplines, things like that. And so I think there's also, it calls in grit, right? Like sometimes you want to make things work and you have to give them your all. I would say that's one thing that I try and what's the word I want to use here? Like I give myself credit for, or one of the things that I'm great with, the skill that I've acquired is like, I may not be enjoying something, but I'm damn sure still going to be good at it. Right. Like I am still going to wake up every day, give it 110%. But with that, I have to monitor like, okay, when is it time to make a change? When is it time to say, this is good? Like I have given it my all. I have tried in a variety of different ways. Now it's time to pivot into something that feels better and feels more like me.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. And for the record, I think that you said it probably more eloquently and more concisely. Like, we're always interviewing. So that was, you said that, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I meant.
Oh man, that's great.
No, it's awesome. No. Okay. So Sloan, you made the transition into sales from a different industry. Do you feel like, I guess I'll take a step back. Like, what advice would you give somebody who is transitioning from a different industry into sales? Were there any specific skills that you really leaned on, either from EY or from your athletic career?
Yeah, so from my athletic career, confidence, right? Like I think there is a humble confidence that you have to go into any change with. Um, especially because, sales, whether people like it or not, like you're buying from an individual. Yes, there's a brand, there's a company, but my face and my team's faces are those at the end of the day that the clients remember, and that they turn to when they have a problem or need a solution. So I think that that's important to remember. I would say another piece of advice that I would give someone really goes like from my days at EY. I would say the thing that I pulled on the hardest was storytelling, learning how to tell a story from point A to point B in a succinct fashion. And I'm smiling, kind of laughing, because I was so fortunate to have so many people that have taught me how to be succinct, because I'm rather salesy and long-winded at times. But learning how to tell a succinct story that brings something to life, I think that is a skill that is so undervalued in sales, because there's a lot of great products out there. There's a lot of great providers out there in the professional services space, and they all have their niche and they all have what they're really good at. But you have to be able to tell the story of how good you are, and you have to be able to back it up with facts and numbers, and you have to be quick on those things. So I think it's really leaning in and being a student in a continuous fashion to whatever it is that you're involved in. So really that beginner's, like anchoring into that beginner's mindset of my story can always improve. My product can always be articulated in a better way. And, I can always be doing more to coach myself and those around me on getting better at those things.
Yeah, you mentioned that you leaned on some mentors or superiors, managers, to help you with that storytelling. Is that the only way to get good at it? Or do you have other recommendations, or are there other ways to really hone in those storytelling skills?
Ooh, that's a very good question. You got me on my toes a little bit here. I would say there are definitely ways to do it outside. The reps are important, right? The
Yeah.
reps are how you get 10,000 hours is 10,000 hours for a reason. But I will say that, taking those masterclass, I'm a huge masterclass fan. I love, taking a course on something, right?
Like
That
the masterclass course, like the website, going to masterclass, taking courses there?
Yeah, or different businesses have their
Yeah.
own versions of that as well that are
Okay.
free and public, as well, but master classes, they're particularly good at it. I leaning into those, like anything that you want to learn. I also think the psychology of sales is super important, and the psychology of human behavior and
Mhm.
understanding why people do what they do allows you to be more empathetic. It allows you to maybe understand like, okay, no now, but I'm going to time it so when X happens, I'm ready to go again. I'm ready to give this another push. So I think master classes, mentorship, reps, and also too like learning from your competitors. There's something to be said for maybe taking a step outside of your box of mentors and maybe looking at competitors. I can't tell you. I'm in the Oracle world now, and so there's so many people that I've seen be successful in this space that technically are direct competitors of mine that
Right.
I just like, I'm like, let's pick each other's brains. Let's, all ships rise with the tide. So how can we lift each other up? How can we make this a fruitful endeavor? And you never know what you're going to learn because they've done it differently and they've been successful and they may have something you haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah. Do you do that specifically by observing their behavior, or do you actually go to them and do a coffee and collaborate? Or
Coffee and collaborate.
yeah.
Getting on the phone and chatting through it is the best, but obviously you have the opportunity to observe their behaviors when you do that. I think, there's not too many times where you'll get to see your customer or your competitor directly engage with a customer.
Mhm.
But you can get, I think, a lot more from it if you're willing to step outside and be bold and say, hey, you're fantastic at what you do, and I want to pick your brain. I want to know how you do this, why you do it. And I think that builds also like bilateral trust, and they'll wind up asking you every time, right? They're going to be like, well, what do you think about that? Because you'll get them thinking.
I love it. Sloan, that's such great advice. Such applicable advice too. Gosh, we only have a few minutes left here, which is such a bummer every time. So I kind of want to go not into like a speed round, but I want to get through a couple more questions here. You lead sales teams where you are now at Sikich, and I want to know what you look for in candidates when you're building a sales team, or what are qualities that are really important for you to have in your team.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, the beginner's mindset and the willingness to learn first and foremost. I want people who can step into environments and assimilate quickly, right? It's not going to be perfect. No environment is ever perfect, but can you step in, take what's given to you and run with it? But then also be able to come back in and drive an open conversation and ask for the things that you need. I think probably what I'm describing here is really solid communication skills. That's paramount, and also people who aren't offended by no. Right? I think that's it's kind of sales typical there a little bit, but you see people that take no personally, and I want people who can take no and understand the why behind no and either approach it in a different way or do it better next time.
Yeah. Awesome. And you've talked about a lot of career advice, so maybe this is redundant. If it is, we can skip it. But I want to know really what the best career advice you've received and how it's really shaped your approach to leading sales teams.
All right. The best career advice I have ever received is bringing authenticity to what you do. I think so many times, particularly in sales, you're trying to chameleon to your environment because you need people to like you. You need people to value what you're saying. So you try and take on, different traits of personalities that you think you need then and there. And I think someone told me, they're like, you are you, and you being you is exactly what you need to be. So you need to step into that authentic way of being and bring it, and people are going to love it and people are going to hate it, and that's okay. But you really just have to bring that authenticity to the table, and it really changed my perspective on, I would leave meetings being like thinking about the conversation rather than thinking about people's perception of me. And I think that's something that young people struggle with in general, and particularly
Yep.
young sales professionals.
Yeah. Yeah. How boring would it be to be loved by everybody? It means you just lack personality,
Yeah,
right?
right. Then no one's gonna like you. It's not what we're
Exactly.
going for it. But yeah,
Exactly.
being your authentic self is the best thing you can possibly be.
Amen. Okay, Sloan, last question for you. This has been so wonderful. What advice, since this podcast was originally started to inspire women to pursue careers in sales, what advice would you offer to women who are considering a career in sales?
Yeah, absolutely. There is, I know we didn't get to touch on this earlier, but there is power in being the only female in the room.
Yes.
That is not something to be afraid of. And I would say resoundingly, I am beyond supported by all of my male counterparts, particularly in those scenarios where, it's funny. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and I was looking through the pictures that we took, and I'm the only female in most of those pictures. And that is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's also having the confidence and the again, mentorship and people around you to signal when something doesn't feel right, or you feel like you aren't able to maybe have the conversations you need or want to have, or feel like, there's a lack of opportunity to communicate, or be involved in something that you feel you should have a seat at the table. But I've always been, fortunately worked with amazing people in my life that have really encouraged me to lean into that feminine aspect of being the only female at the table, and the different perspective that can enable. So don't be afraid of it. And also to like people like females in the workforce are a growing presence, and it's an important polarity in business as well. Men and women have a variety of different strengths, and that sometimes they're within the female or the male that you think they're supposed to be, and sometimes they're not. And I think it's that balance that really makes the world go round, and the reason that the business workplace is improving day after day.
Thank you so much, Sloan. What a wonderful way to end the show. Can I encourage anyone listening to connect with you on LinkedIn?
Please, please. And thank you so much for having me. This has been amazing. I love what you are doing with this podcast and everything. But yeah, please reach out. I'm happy to connect. And hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
I know we need a part two because I didn't get to half the questions I wanted to ask you. Oh, thank you so much, Sloan. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you next week.
Thank you, Jordan.